Okay, hello everybody. This is Soraya Walters from Sorayaverse, but also Purpose Professional Media. I'm going to cross post this video, so it's going to be on my podcast channel and it's going to be on my main YouTube channel. But there's something that I really do want to address, something that has been strongly on my heart and in my spirit for a while. I want to address this whole DEI situation. Now, to kind of preface this, I do think that was a controversy around Tabitha Brown, Auntie Tab. I love her. I just want to say that. I want to start that and say, I really love her. I love the energy she brings. I am not a vegan, but I dig the recipes. She just has a presence about her. And I feel like she has that warm auntie charisma. I don't know. She got something going on. Okay. She kind of has a little bit of an it factor to me. I really do love her, but and she has businesses. She's a businesswoman too. I love how she took it beyond being a creator, and she's a businesswoman. We know Donna's Recipe. I do think she also had a collaboration with Target. And then I know she had a restaurant called Kale My Name. And I love that restaurant name, Kale My Name. I mean, I'm not going to eat some kale, but Kale My Name sounds cute. I might try it. I really do love her. But yeah, she came online and talked a little bit about what she thinks regarding the Target supposedly DEI thing. And I think she was telling people, think about the big picture, think about the Black businesses that would be involved if there was to be a boycott. So I wanted to make a video kind of just addressing my perspective on this DEI issue. When I saw that video, I was inspired to bring up my own perspective in DEI. So just to kind of give a little bit of a background. So I actually was in DEI work in college in 2020 when George Floyd, may his soul rest in peace, passed. So I have seen the development of DEI over the last, we could say 4 years. And I also have served in various roles within DEI. I was a DEI intern in a nonprofit corporation. I also was a DEI student leader at a predominantly white institution. And then I also had started a DEI tech company. So I've seen this from various perspectives. And I really do want to talk about, DEI, what I think is going on with it, why I think it ended, and then also what we can learn from it. So yes, I ran and I received funding for a DEI project that I aimed to turn into a business. So I was very passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm a social justice type. I really do like speaking out about things. I like doing things. I like being a part of things. And diversity, equity, and inclusion seemed like what we needed in 2020. If y'all remember what 2020 was, it was a year of reckoning. And it's funny because everybody said 2024 was also a hard year. And I would have to agree, 2024 was also a super hard year. But I think the reason why it was so hard as well is because it was the next leap year, after 2020. At the end of the day, 2020 was a really hard year. We had COVID, we had George Floyd, people were actually out protesting, risking their lives, not social distancing. But some people were like, hey, I don't care. We saw that video. We have to move. We have to do something. We saw corporations mobilize and produce funding that we didn't even know they had. In business, there's such a thing called CSR, corporate social responsibility. But I would honestly say 2020 stretched corporations to go beyond CSR. So usually a CSR program is we have partnerships with nonprofits and we're helping the community and we're feeding the kids and we're making things lit and we're, helping the community get fed, get houses, get clothing. It's a lot of partnerships with nonprofits, external engagements. A lot of it is intended to help the community, but a lot of it is also for public relations. You can think about all these tech companies that produce a lot of waste, especially in terms of carbon footprint and such, doing a lot for sustainability. I think it's a good thing, right? It's a good thing. It can be kind of surface level, but it is a good thing because it does show that, business does have a responsibility to give back to society. But for the first time ever, I think DEI was when CSR kind of turned inward. DEI was saying to people at the end of the day, corporate social responsibility is important. Like how we treat people out there is important, but also how we treat people internally is important, internally in our organizations. So I started thinking about DEI when I was running my business from not just a corporation perspective, but also from an entrepreneurship perspective, right? Coming out of college and becoming a Black entrepreneur really introduced me to the realities of the funding landscape, especially for Black founders. Black founders only receive 0.4% of institutional capital. So we could think of venture capital, family offices, et cetera, et cetera. You know, we're really not plugged in. And I've heard stories of even, we could say, Black founders that have worked for the top venture capitalists. I'm talking about Andreessen Horowitz, which is A16. I'm talking about Sequoia Capital. Like they've worked for these Silicon Valley, we could say premium tier VCs, and still couldn't get funding for their businesses. So there was a lot of systemic discrimination. And the company that I was working on was going to help with that in a myriad of ways, particularly for entrepreneurs that wanted to build inclusive brands. I'm no longer working on that because I was one of those people who also came into DEI after it got popular, and the backlash just seemed unnerving to me. It was something that didn't rest well with me, and I began seeing a lot of flaws in the methodologies. I began seeing a lot of flaws in what DEI was intended to do versus what it actually did, and that's a little bit of what I want to talk about in this video. So when I did see Tabitha's video, I was like, okay, I can see from both perspectives, having been a business owner, but also having been on the other side of this. First and foremost, I think the first problem was that we were trying to build something. We were trying to build a new foundation on shaky ground. I really do think that a lot of it, and I don't want to say the P word, not that P word, but the performative word. A lot of it was performative. I hate that is a word that we use because I've heard that word all the time, but I really do think that certain systems and structures, it was almost impossible to fully implement DEI because of the fact that the ground is shaky. Like even if you think of your particular business, right? Like the industry in itself reinforces certain patterns, certain ways of thinking. Even like we could think of like in 2020, there was a record number of entrepreneurship pledges. Like, hey, we're going to invest in Black founders. We're going to do all of these things. And, you know, we've gone back to essentially that same place that we came from, where I'm seeing a LinkedIn tiers all the time about like, I can't make ends meet. I'm running my startup. I don't have institutional funding. So for a lot of Black founders, it's like angel, right? Angel investment, which is essentially an investor that how would I say this, comes in and they're an independent investor and invest in your business. Some angels have angel groups, so they're called angel syndicates, and they're groups of like high net worth individuals that write checks and invest in businesses and they get equity in exchange. Or VC, right? Even bootstrapping can be very, very hard if we think of access to capital, and we think of a lot of the other barriers that stand in the way of an entrepreneur of color's life. So when I thought about all of that, I just kept on thinking like, yeah, we're trying to build a new foundation on very, very shaky ground. It doesn't mean that things cannot change, but it means that things will be very hard. And I think harder than we actually anticipated them being. I think about the climate movement happening in parallel to DEI and being like kind of like a good example of where things can go wrong. So in the climate movement, there's a lot of conversation about like, hey, AI is using a lot of water. These tech companies are like really not caring about the planet. It's kind of the same thing. Like we can talk about tech needing to be more green. But the truth is, right, technological advancement as we know it depends on a lot of energy, depends on a heavy water source, depends on a lot of the things that we take for granted. So it starts with the foundational, like, how do we view the earth? And I think it's the same thing around DEI. Like, it started with the foundational things. And I really do feel like we were trying to build around, not around it, but we were trying to build a new foundation on shaky ground. This goes back to that Audre Lorde quote that I'm going to drop in here. It's one of those things where it's like, what were we really trying to do? What really was the goal? Was it the vanity metrics of seeing more people hired, more people funding, or what more people funded, on the entrepreneurship side? On the corporate side, it was more people hired, more people promoted, or are we trying to see systemic change? I feel like there was no real balance between both, and there was no real way to determine what the goal was. I also think that there were too many names for the work. There was a lot of emphasis on, and we can even think of like beyond nomenclature, there was a lot of emphasis on what we were saying, like what are the people saying versus what was actually being done. So I remember seeing DEI, D.E.I.B, J.E.D.I, and I'm going to break it down, right? I'm going to break these down for you all because it does sound like I'm doing hooks on phonics. It does sound like I'm doing hooked on phonics, and it does sound like I'm throwing a whole bunch of acronyms at you like corporate speak. So I'm going to break it down, right? DEI was diversity, equity, inclusion. D.E.I.B was diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And J.E.D.I was justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, something like that. And people kept on putting so much terminology into it. As someone who was a practitioner, there was othering, there was belonging, there were so many terminologies that we had to learn. It felt like you were getting a sociology and an organizational dynamics degree all over again. I also think that there was a lot of, there was a huge for-profit motive as well around the language and the nomenclature. So I remember reading an article from Harvard Business Review that talked a lot about the DEI industrial complex. And I'm going to address that later in this video. But the industrial complex, and part of why that existed is because people had to pay for all these courses, all these certifications. We were jumping through 1,000 hoops once again to now be able to advocate for something that is our internal lived reality, which really, really sucks. There were added layers of respectability to it. Like I saw some people who were in DEI and they were more like corporate activists. So think of like J.E.D.I. They put a heavy emphasis on justice. And then there were some people that were more like therapists and mental health oriented, wellness oriented practitioners. So they're like the D.E.I.B. Like they put a heavy emphasis on belonging. And then there are other people that just didn't fit into any of the brands. And I saw a lot of DEI practitioners wanting to fit themselves into something like, am I the corporate activist, right? The Amazon labor union type energy, or am I the energy of a wellness practitioner who uses DEI to advance? Or am I somebody who is heavy on the business case? So the business case basically is that at the end of the day, these things exist in businesses, right? Like DEI exists in a business, and the business case speaks to the fact that you have to, for some reason, prove, right, that the bottom line is affected in order for these programs to still be implemented and instituted. So I think the lack of a common language, the lack of common frameworks is part of the reason why it didn't work, or isn't working as much. I mean, I do know that there are people who are still fighting in the field, and I totally do respect that and I stand with them. But I also do understand that here are a couple things that I think were kind of wrong and kind of iffy about it. And I think the lack of unification when it came to language, lack of standardization, the feeling like you had to take 1,000 courses and certifications to kind of keep up is something that I think was kind of a downfall of it. And I do think that, I mean, we cannot blame people, right? Like it was trendy for a moment, right? It had a moment. And I think one thing that I hate about the social media culture is I feel like we live now in moments and in eras. And unfortunately, like George Floyd's death became an era for people. It became a moment for people. And there was a heavy spotlight on companies. Companies felt like they had to do the right thing. But there also was a huge entrance, we could say, or market opening in the DEI market. I do believe that I did some research and it talked about the DEI market having a $24 billion valuation by the year 2030. So there still is steady growth, but I do think there was a heavy spotlight on, hey, like, what do we do now? Like, it's trendy right now. People are posting black squares. We're going in. It was a huge trendy moment. And it was also a popular moment for people to become consultants. And I'm happy for my black entrepreneurs that use DEI as a way to become consultants. I'm happy for those who used it as a way to break into spaces that they didn't even have access to before. Frankly, I was one of those people. So I can't even knock the progress that was made. But when I do think of all of these things and the progress in the spotlight, there were still forces trying to dim that light, forces trying to take that out. And we could think of like what happened before, like what happened before George Floyd, right? So at the time, like diversity in corporate America didn't make any strides, even with EEOC laws, right? Even with even with all of the things that we claimed stood for diversity back then, because I see a lot of people say like, hey, I did this work before it was popular. I did this work before it was labeled that. And of course, there have been people who have been doing that work. I mean, we called them back then, racial equity trainers. We called them, we could say implicit bias coordinators and unconscious bias trainers, etc. Like there were things that were done, but there was no opportunity, right, back then for companies to say, hey, we are the most diverse and get free press out of it, or here's our chief diversity officer and get free press. So there was like a PR motive behind a lot of it. And this kind of goes back to what I said about being performative. There was the opportunity for press. There was the opportunity for competition. And I remember when I was in business school and we talked a lot about like business from the vantage point of a CEO. I think people have to realize that in business, right, a lot of your success hinges on your stock price and your market capitalization. So your market capitalization is essentially the total market value of your company. And that is based directly on when you're publicly traded. We can think of Meta, we can think of Google, we can think of these publicly traded companies. That is based highly on, not even based highly on, that is rooted in, right, your stock price. So at the end of the day, if Apple put out a diversity declaration and the other companies didn't, right, the stock price is going to drop consistently for the other companies. And investors are going to we could say bewildered that their companies aren't keeping up. The companies that they have shares in aren't keeping up. So there was this motive of like having to play catch up, but it was almost like it wasn't an authentic race, because at that time, right, in 2020, there was really no strides being made, right? There were no strides being made before George Floyd's death. And it's almost like his death, shocked us open, but also made these companies realize, hey, we can have another arms race. This time we can play the DEI game. So there was a business case that was established, right? There was a lot of conversation around like companies with diverse boards doing better, There was even conversation about women-led companies, even women-led countries, I think, doing better during COVID. So there was all this conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I still saw it very much rooted in the business case. I still saw it very much being rooted in the numbers rather than in the lives touched or making a difference. I do think there were two schools of thought around DEI. There was this one heavily like metrics based, we could say psychometric based alignment that needed to happen. So yeah, like to be honest, for us to continue to fund these ERGs, and ERGs are those like employee resource groups. Think like Black at Facebook is one when they were called Facebook. I don't know if they're still called Facebook. They have like different ones for different communities. We need to see the statistics. We need to see the proof. We need to see that the bottom line is being affected positively. But then there's also this other school of thought of like, hey, like, but the people matter though, like, but belonging matters. And if we belong at work, we feel more productive. There were really two schools of thought. And those two schools of thought really didn't unite to one common framework. And that business case, like I said, created that arms race where now like something that I think had positive intentions became tied to another like capitalist metric, to be honest. And there were people that were propped up, chief diversity officers hired. There were a lot of things that happened. I think I do believe I saw that 70% of chief diversity officers were non-Black or non-POC, people of color, that is. There was a lot going on. And I just kept on thinking like, wow, like what is happening here? Like we're not grounded in a common vision for anything. There's just a lot happening, a lot of hiring, a lot of firing. Politically, there also was a lot that happened, right? So I really do think that there were some things that happened along the way that made me realize that this was going to collapse. One of them being like Governor Ron DeSantis, right? Leading the way when it came to anti-DEI efforts. A lot of companies followed suit. We got MEI, right? Merit, Excellence, Intelligence. We got a lot of like anti-DEI rhetoric. I think also the Harvard versus Students for Fair Admissions, the overturning of affirmative action, race-based admissions also had a lot to do with why these efforts have stalled. And even the Fearless Fund came under fire, right? So Fearless Fund is a Black female grant program for Black women's businesses. I applied to it when I had a business. I think the work that they do is super dope. I'm a fan of the founders as well. And it was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. So there was a lot going on where we realized that, you know, things would have to change. Things just wouldn't change the way we wanted them to change. Like they wouldn't become more inclusive. They would actually become a stalled for a while. Like things would stall. And in order for DEI to come back, I believe it will have to become a little bit more centralized. There will have to be a central vision. There will have to be an understanding of the stakeholders involved in these sort of decisions, and a give and take between that market, right, orientation, that business case, but also that we could say, yeah, that belonging piece, that human piece that sometimes corporations don't want to play by. But yeah, here's what this all means for your career. I want to just leave with some tangible stuff. So referrals will become increasingly important when landing a job. Like referrals will become super important. Networking was always very important, but if you are a person of color, like trying to get anywhere in corporate America, whether you're trying to get promoted or you're trying to get a job, referrals, talent pools, etc., will become increasingly important. You will have to be able to get creative to get your foot through the door. I've seen people be able to do it, but really, like in business, I do think they said that referrals, like 70%, you're 70% more likely to get a job or something like that. If you get a referral, you're a huge percentage more likely to get a job if you get a referral. So try to get those referrals in. Try to get people to vouch for you that know you. Make sure that you're not approaching recruiters cold, right? If you can get that invite, if you can get that alley hoop, that CC in an email, right? Do those little things. I'm not in corporate America, but I've been around enough of these spaces to know how the game is played. And yes, referral will be really, really important, and it will be a vital part of the hiring decision, especially for people of color. Number two, there will be less emphasis on employee belonging efforts. So there will be less emphasis on employee belonging. Now more than ever, like keep your friend group, keep your business, keep your life outside of your work. Make sure that you have passions outside of work. Make sure that you are whole in yourself, because at the end of the day, like there's going to be less of that belonging. I don't even know how the ERGs are going to get funded. So ERGs are those like cultural, like affinity groups that they have at work. I don't know how those are going to get funded. There will be so much, there will be a smaller, like lesser emphasis on belonging. So make sure you carve out your own spaces, develop healthy friendships at work, make sure that you can, keep your peace, manage your energy. That's all I can say. And make sure you carve out your own spaces for belonging, whether inside or outside the workforce. You have to be also, number three, you have to be proactive in seeking out mentors and sponsors. So mentors and sponsors are key to the life of any professional of color, right? We need other people to help us to get through the doors. We need allyship. And that's kind of one of my favorite parts of DEI. I really did love the allyship culture. I have benefited greatly from people who have brought my name up in spaces where a person that looked like me could have never entered. I do think that you have to be proactive though in seeking out these mentors and these sponsors. You got to make them know you. You got to make them see you. It can be small things like wanting to take somebody out for a coffee chat. It can also be making sure that people know you're interested in the promotion. You're interested in these sort of things. I am by no means corporate, but I've seen the game be played. Find your mentors, find your sponsors, find those who will vouch for you. And I think one of the keys in this sort of environment is liking who likes you. I think one of the best mentorship relationships I've had was very, very organic. This person liked me, I liked them. We just vibed, right? Like who likes you. The mentor or the sponsor doesn't have to be the most powerful person or even the loudest person. Think of it this way, like the popular people, everybody's trying to get them to be their mentor. Find somebody who is cool that you vibe with outside of this work situation and get them to be your mentor and your sponsor, and not vibe in that way. Okay. No messiness. Now, I'm not preaching messiness, but find a mentor or a sponsor that can advocate for you. I also want you to know the difference between mentor and sponsor. So a mentor is somebody that, wants your growth and your development. They're the person that will give you the hard feedback. You can send them your resume before you apply for that promotion, whatever. You can help. How would I say that? How would I say this? You can help them help you, okay, by showing them where you need areas for growth. The sponsor is the person with power. They are the power broker. They are the person that comes in your life and tells you, hey, here's an opportunity. Let me know if you want a referral. Let me know if you want me to connect you. Let me know if you want me to do this for you. I think one of the best books that I read was Social Intelligence by Marissa King. And she talks a lot about like brokers, expansionists, conveners, like the different types of relationship builders that we have in our lives. Everybody needs a power broker in their lives. Somebody that can open doors for you just by saying your name. Find those people. One of my favorite Bible verses is that your gift will make room for you and break you in the presence of mighty men. And I think in this moment, right, we really do have to rely on our faith and for our gifts to make room for us, but also to create that environment where we are meeting people who can help us. We are telling people a little bit about our vision and our goals, etc. And we're watching where the energy flows and moving with that. I also want to talk about entrepreneurial support. So I think Earn Your Leisure talked a little bit about like there being less support for entrepreneurs of color. Yes, there will be absolutely less support for entrepreneurs of color. Absolutely. There will be less direct support. One thing that I think is so important now is angel investment. If you can find somebody, a family member, somebody with some equity in their home, or somebody who has a retirement fund that they don't mind splurging on, or somebody who just is very financially savvy to believe in your vision. Entrepreneurs of color in this day and age will definitely need to be flexible. Will have to find people who believe in their vision and can write those first checks. I think one of the things that I hate about the venture capital industry, and people poke fun at it, but it is actually a really serious situation, the friends and family round issue. It's almost like, oh, well, don't come to us for institutional funding if you didn't raise $150K from friends and family. I've seen founders who are Black and people of color do that. I've seen them raise $150,000 from family, but at the same time, it's like, a lot of people don't got that type of family. Like family don't got the money like that. Family's money is not that long. So what do you do? At the end of the day, grants are great. Community development financial institutions, I think CDFIs. I'm hearing a lot of things that we can access. We'll just have to get creative, but understand that there will be less direct support. So targeted for communities. So you'll have to get very, very creative as well. So what do you think? Like, what do you think of my video? What do you think of my opinion? Sorry if I was a little bit ranty, but what do you think of my opinions? Like, I love to have conversations. So converse with me, y'all. Tell me what you think. And also, like, how do you think the loss and the overturning, well, let me not say overturning, but the backlash of DEI or against DEI will affect your career? I'm going to make another video where I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Tabitha Brown situation and my feelings and thoughts around it, as well as many of the companies who have backed down from their DEI commitments, and what we can learn about that from a Black entrepreneurship and collective organizing perspective. Okay, y'all, this is a Sorayaverse and also Purposeful Professional Media. Wherever you're watching this, like, comment, and subscribe. Bye. I'm out.